Hello and welcome to the Super Team Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your commissioner and your host, Brandon DeFreitas, and we're going to give this a try for a while here. Going to try to do one once a week. Hopefully, point out some interesting transactions, interesting ad drops, moves in terms of moving people in and out of your lineup. How did you win the week? How did you lose the week? How did, Edwin and John get screwed? How is their week already done? Talk about all of that stuff and keep it interesting for us going forward. First things first, though, let's get a little housekeeping out of the way. Our Super Team League, we want to thank John for, all the years he spent as commissioner. I took over this year, but John did a whole lot for the league in terms of weekly write-ups. He's still doing it for the baseball league, but especially for the football league, too. He would have his write-ups, deal with a lot of controversies involving Justin Williams, which is, completely inevitable. And, he overall did a tremendous job. And we're just hoping that combined we can all do a good job to keep this going without him. Without him as commissioner, he is still in the league, of course, and still, playing pretty well, a defending champ as well with his former co-manager, me. So thank you, John. And, this podcast is just one way to hopefully cover the gaps of those amazing weekly write-ups we got from you. So jumping right back into it, we're going to start off here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the draft recap. After the draft recap, we want to get into what I call the trade block. We've talked to around 6 owners in the league. They've listed some people on the trade block, and let me tell you, there's some interesting guys out there who are available, and and hopefully this helps lead to people making trades, realizing that someone's available who isn't. I mean, talking to these owners, I didn't know some of these guys were available, and now I do. Now I'll be making some trade offers, hopefully before the podcast releases, get a little competitive advantage. But you know me, I'm not too concerned about bending the rules a little bit, especially if it involves Mark on the other end of it. So, getting right here to the draft recap. Interesting rules changes this year. Went to a 3 wide receiver, full point PPR. Not so much any of the bonuses we used to have either. So, I think it made the draft interesting. And, the rules came out maybe a week or two before the draft. So there wasn't a whole lot of time to react. And I think it resulted in a lot of different strategies across the board. So, we'll go one by one right now. And we're starting off with John's team. I'm too old, you're too slow. The former commissioner. He went out and I'm going to try to identify a value pick or a steal and a bust in each round, in each draft. When you're talking steals, there's no bigger steal than Austin Eckler here. Round 7, John gets him at pick 74. I think a lot of owners were hesitant to draft Austin Eckler because they didn't know what was going on with Melvin Gordon. But looking back, should we have been? I mean, last year Eckler was a top 24 running back in PPR formats, and that was half PPR. Now we're in a full PPR. He's probably, lower to mid-range RB2 even with Melvin Gordon around. So going in round 7 was a huge steal for John. He took advantage of that. And Eckler's been, I believe, and we'll double check this right now, I believe he's been the top running back in this format. Well, if he comes in at number 2, but John also got Christian McCaffrey in round 1, who comes in at number 1. So John's sitting there with the number 1 and number 2 running backs on the season. Somehow he's only 2-2, and there's been some real tough luck for him. I know he played against Jordan Howard last week, and that's not the only crazy blow up game. I think I could be wrong here, but did he play Lamar Jackson in week 1? He might have. So some tough luck, but expect John to be there at the end of this thing. In terms of busts for John, there aren't many. I mean, his first 4 picks were good. Christian McCaffrey, Keenan Allen, Julian Edelman, Kenny Galladay. But then you get to round 5, Darius Geis, and, A.J. Green in round 6, too. You can't really opine on that yet. But at least with the Darius Geis one, he got injured week 1. He's basically out for the season. I'm I don't think he's on injured reserve to return, so he's gone for the season. Fifth round pick, 50th overall, talented player, but so many injury problems. And at this point, you wonder if he's even going to have a career in the NFL. So fifth, you spend a fifth there, you miss. I think that qualifies as a bust. There are also some concerns about Washington too. Whether or not you can have a productive running back on a team that's so poor. But overall, great draft for John. Moving on to VJ here, Team Balls. I think he's been Team Balls every year in the league, just like completely unwilling to change. But you got to respect him for that. VJ comes in and the steal of his draft. It's funny. I wouldn't normally say a second round pick is a steal, but Dalvin Cook at pick 20, hard to not call that a steal. I'll also highlight Courtland Sutton in round 11, pick 125. I think that was an amazing value as well. I think he's a top 15 receiver right now. But going back to Dalvin Cook is going to end up the season, barring injury, as a top 5 running back. Some people weren't really. I mean, I know I personally was a little leery about the injury history, a little leery that he hadn't put it all together at the NFL level yet. VJ takes the chance here, and he's got a top 5 running back at pick 20, and that has to qualify as a steal. In terms of busts, Hunter Henry round 6, and this was highlighted. I did a draft recap for another league I'm into, and the problem with Hunter Henry, and even, well, I'm sure we'll get to him soon, and OJ Howard, is this was the second tier of tight ends after George Kittle, Zach Ertz, and Travis Kelce, of course. And after that, you had people drafting Evan Ingram, OJ Howard, and Hunter Henry, and they were, a lot of people were excited going into the year saying, wow, there's a second tier, but unfortunately Henry gets injured, he hasn't done anything, and at pick 68, it's been a bust so far for VJ. Moving from VJ to Marco, the Filipino footballer, spelled with it. I don't know where he was going with that. Not really interesting team name. Maybe he drafted in the Philippines, but you'd expect a little bit more creativity from someone like Marco. In terms of bus, man, I have to go with Juju Smith-Schuster, drafted in the first round, pick 11, PPR format. I would have been all over that if I were in his spot. Unfortunately, with the Big Ben injury, he doesn't seem to have the same rapport with Mason Rudolph, and he even got a toe injury, Juju did, in week 1 against the New England Patriots. And he just hasn't played well. And for the 11th overall pick, that is tough luck for your team. Value-wise, you look at Marco's draft, he really didn't hit on anyone. And you know what? I hate to be that guy, but I'm going to say he didn't have a single value in the draft. Oh, well, no, I stand corrected until you get to round 14. I was looking at it. I mean, look at some of the mid-round selections. Curtis Samuel, round 7. That's not really a value. Latavius Murray, 8. Kalen Ballage, Geronimo Allison, Peyton Barber. Not a whole lot there. Ronald Jones, round 14, does qualify as a steal. He, right now, I believe he's a top 20 running back. I could vet that. But the one week he didn't finish too high was week 2 when he had an injury and came out of that game. So Ronald Jones right now, he's the 30th ranked. But look at some of these finishes. I mean, he's been double digits in 3 out of the 4 weeks. He's had 13 or more carries in all but that week 2. And 19 carries last week, as well as some long runs called back against the Rams. So definitely a nice little value for Marco there. Moving on to Kenny. Does anyone know if Kenny's actually paying attention to the league? I please reach out. Let me know. We'll discuss it next week on the pod. I don't think he's actually doing much, and maybe it's because his first round pick Tyreek Hill got hurt and he threw in the towel. That's fine, but not the best start for Kenny in the league. You're going to have to say his bust is Joe Mixon, though, in round 2. And look, maybe this is, again, your first round pick gets hurt, your second round pick doesn't look like the same player. And it's probably because Cincinnati doesn't have an offensive line and is still throwing the red rifle out there. I feel like I was in college when Andy Dalton, well, I know he was when he was drafted, but he's been the same player since then. He's never really improved. He's just an okay average starter, and It's really starting to affect Joe Mixon, it looks like. It's a tough pick for Kenny there. In terms of values, I'm so tempted to just say no one drafted values because it's fun. I want to find that team that didn't get a value. But Kenny came in with LaShawn McCoy in round 8. That's pretty pretty solid for a player who's been at least an RB2 all season. If we look at his results, I'd be tempted to say he's double digits every game this week, besides week 2. So he was 10, 5.3, 23, and 16.9 in this full PPR format. Real solid results. You get that in round 8 at a running back position. Definitely well worth it. We get to the first team where I look at the team name and I'm not sure who. Oh, here we go. Mike Crawford. He always has something crazy. You know, some crazy team name I don't understand. Risk It for the Biscuit. And Tate and Metcalf's Royd Emporium. Who knows where he's going with that, but we'll let him have it. In terms of his bust, there's not a whole lot out there. Like, you look at it, he had a solid start to the drafts, but the one player who's underperformed so far, so we'll give him the bust title, is Devonta Freeman. End of round 2, which is why it's tough for me to say anything because it's like you waited the end of round 2 is pretty solid for Devonta, but he just hasn't really had it this year. The kind of got screwed that the Atlanta Falcons drafted 2 offensive linemen early in the first round in the NFL draft. Both of them got hurt. I think one of them came back, but he's still like the offensive line really hasn't improved this year. Freeman's been getting it on lately, but 3 out of the 4 weeks, he's below 2.5 yards a carry. Week 3 against Indianapolis, he brought up to 5.5, and he's only been double digits 2 out of 4 weeks. For your second round pick, just not what you're looking for. Now we get to overall an underperforming team. You know, it's funny, I'm on my team right now. Brando Maddock has not been automatic one bit. Still like the squad and just 1-3 hasn't really performed well. And looking at it, the bust has to be Sony Michel in round 4. Sony Michel, when I picked him in round 4, I thought this guy was going to be a shoo-in for a top 15 running back finish. Maybe he'd get more involved in the passing game. But first of all, he's not involved at all in the passing game. I don't know. Does he not have Brady's trust? Because back when he was drafted, I remember the passing game was one of the items that everyone said was a selling point for Sony Michel. And I believe Mike Giardi said that on Twitter the other day. He said that was a selling point when he got drafted. But now they're completely giving away whether or not they're running or passing. Saw this crazy stat that Sony Michel, in terms of a positional player in the NFL, the Patriots are running the highest percentage of snaps when Sony Michel is on the field than any positional player in the league. So not even Derrick Henry is out there for a higher percentage of running plays. Really, that'll cripple you as a team. And it just isn't what you're looking for as a first-round pick for the Patriots or a fourth-round pick for my team. So really a mistake there. In terms of values, oh, sweet. I could rip on my own team for not having a huge value. But saving it with Evan Ingram in round 6, this was that second tier of tight ends. He's been the top tight end so far. He's getting absolutely peppered with targets. I know you have the Mark DeMellons of the world out there who think that Golden Tate's going to come in and be the target hog for Daniel Jones. I'm sorry, but Golden Tate looked washed up to me last year, and even when he was with the Lions, he wasn't quite the same player. I don't expect that to happen one bit, especially when you have a stud like Evan Ingram out there. Ingram definitely the value or steal pick of my draft, and Mark, deal with it. There's not going to be a Golden Tate explosion, buddy. All right, the Golden Geese, another team that doesn't change its team names, VJ and Tim. I guess it's not surprising with them, but disappointing. I'll call it disappointing. That's a fair way to put it. Tim, in terms of bus, it's tempting to go James Conner in round 1 at pick 12, but how do you not go Stephon Diggs, pick 36? We're in a PPR format. He had over 100 receptions last year, a whole bunch of targets when they had John DeFilippo as their coordinator. And now with Kevin Stefanski as the coordinator in Minnesota, they're running the ball so much that Stephon Diggs wants out, and he's causing a lot of drama this week because of it. And so is Adam Thielen, and I don't blame them one bit. Look at the money they spent in Minnesota. They spent a ton of money on Stephon Diggs, just as almost as much on Adam Thielen. Then they went out and spent at the time a record contract on Kirk Cousins, and they don't throw the ball. They're running the ball at an insane rate. And it's like, great, Dalvin Cook's good and all, but you're not going to win that way. And you know what the problem is? It's Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer last year, head coach of the Vikings, was so disappointed that they didn't improve on their 13-3 season the year before that he was like, no, the problem is we need to run the ball more. No, the problem is that you're so stuck in the 1980s that you have no idea how to coach football anymore. You have two of the most dynamic receivers in the league and a high-paid quarterback. Throw the ball, you moron. Oh man, I'm such a Stephon Diggs fan. This one hits hard, so it's definitely a bust for Tim's team. In terms of values, yeah, I love saying no values. Maybe I'll give it to Tim here. Yeah, I don't think Tim had a single value in the draft. I mean, if we're going from round five down. Josh Gordon, Calvin Ridley, Devin Singletary, Matt Burita in round eight. Fine, we'll save him. Matt Burita in round eight. He's going to be at least a 30% share all season in that San Francisco backfield, and that San Fran backfield leads the league in terms of fantasy points per game at the running back position. So, having a share that's valuable, and especially in round eight. But really would have liked to give Tim the no value there. Brown Wentz AWOL. I mean, here we go, Edwin. I love giving Edwin a hard time. Yeah, we all know I live for it. I love the guy. Uh, but it's hard to really give him a really hard time about Antonio Brown. It was a miss, but it was pick 22 in a PPR format for a Hall of Fame receiver and a player who, in this format, every other year on the Pittsburgh Steelers would have been the first overall pick. So, unfortunately, as much as I would like to, I cannot give him a hard time for the Antonio Brown pick, but it absolutely is a bust. Value wise, going down his team, man, Michael Gallup and Austin Hooper. I don't know if I'm fully on board on the Austin Hooper train yet. He's gotten a ton of targets because the offensive line stinks in Atlanta. And they can't, they want to get the ball to Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones, but they haven't been able to because of the offensive line. And Hooper's been the beneficiary of that. Gallup, while he was injured, he looked really good when he was out there. So I'm going to give the split one, Austin Hooper and Michael Gallup, in double-digit rounds, 10th round, 11th round for Edwin. Both look like they're going to work out for him, and that'll definitely help your team out. And it's probably one of the main reasons Edwin's been able to hang in there despite the Antonio Brown selection. This is, you probably caught on this earlier in the show. I'm still a little bitter with the Vampire League result to Mark. He absolutely smashed me. And if we have time here at the end of the cast, we'll talk a little bit about our Vampire League. Mark has done a really good job in fantasy this year, and he's like my nemesis right now because of it. He's usually the Austin Eckler guy. John jumped in and got that. It was funny. I'm bringing up the standings now to see how John's doing. Yeah, no, so let's see how Mark's doing. He's 4-0. This guy, like, everything, he's turning shit into diamonds right now, everywhere he turns. It's unbelievable. I even lost the draft recap because I'm getting so fired up about it. But he sits next to me, just giving him a hard time. Uh, yeah, I mean, we'll talk about his. We'll get this pod back on track for a second here and talk about his value. Lamar Jackson, league winner, top fantasy football player so far this year. Mark gets him in round 11. I mean, that's his hands down. This is probably the reason he's 4-0. I have Lamar Jackson in my league home and I'm 4-0. It's just, you draft a player you expect to be on your bench or maybe a high upside guy or, it's a late round quarterback and all of a sudden he's the best player in the league and you're like, well, that'll really help the squad. And in terms of busts, Aaron Jones in round 3, there's been so much talent with Aaron Jones over the years. And you know what? I know points wise he hasn't been a bust. What has been a bust for me is that the new coaching staff still isn't using him as much as we all would have hoped. And the fact that like his entire fantasy value so far has been predicated on these 1 yard touchdowns. I believe he has 3 in the last 2 weeks. touchdowns are not a sticky stat, and those are going to start to go away, or start to have some regression as the season goes along. So I'm gonna do the early prediction here on the bust for Mark in round three. That being said, he's 4-0 here. He absolutely stole my soul in the Vampire League. So congratulations, Mark. No hard feelings, despite what you're hearing on the pod. Chevy Kamara. I always is this Chris? This is Chris. I keep seeing it. It actually might not be. It's not Chris. It's Will Tam. Not. I've been mixing up their team names all season. All right. In terms of values and busts, let's comb through his draft here. And of course, the ESPN app crashes. At some point, we're going to do a show here on why we need to switch to the Sleeper platform. This ESPN app is so clunky, it's unbelievable. All right, bust. We're going to have to go Tevin Coleman in round six, and it's because of injury, but it's also because Matt Breita's looks so good, Raheem Mostert's looks so good, Jeff Wilson might be the goal line back. If Coleman didn't get injured, I think he could have had a 50% share of this backfield. I really don't see how he's going to have a 50% share going forward because Mostert's been so efficient, and they might keep four running backs and just rotate them all. So I think that opportunity for Coleman to be a 50% or plus snap count guy, I think it's passed, and that's unfortunate for Tam. Granted, it was around six picks, so it's not devastating or anything. In terms of values, Russell Wilson in round 10. Oh boy, did he look good last night. Also, Mark Andrews in round 13, I should highlight for Tam. But Russell looked like an early season MVP candidate. I know we all love Pat Mahomes, and he's fantastic in his own right. But Russell, I feel like, has been underrated in the NFL in general for the last few years. Was it 2 years ago when Carson Wentz had his injury? Everyone loved how Carson Wentz was playing. I remember watching the Seahawks, and the Seahawks would have been like a 2 or 3 win team without Russell Wilson, and they made a playoff run. They might have been 8-8 that year. I don't mean like made the play, but they challenged for the playoffs, and it was all Russell. He did everything for them. I really do think he's a top three quarterback in the league right now and an MVP candidate. And they're in a heavy running offense. And all the numbers said that there was going to be some efficiency regression, but maybe we should have considered that he's a really freaking good player. So Tam here with a nice little value selection in round 10. All right, the Sandy Clammers, also known as Will Travers' team. We're gonna come up and we're gonna talk about the trade targets soon. When I reached out to Travers, he said, "My entire team, it blows." So, I mean, do we just say his whole team's a bust? I don't know. But looking here, man, Adam Thielen in round three in a PPR format, you really would have thought that was going to be an absolute steal. And again, it's Minnesota. It's that curmudgeon named Mike Zimmer who just needs to get fired. He is so bad. He manages that team worse than I can't even drop any. I really don't want to drop work references on this pod, but you guys can fill in the blanks with the way this summer ended up. Adam Thielen just really is being affected by the poor coaching in Minnesota right now, and it's unfortunate to see it. All right, values. In a PPR format, getting Chris Thompson in round 13, that's a solid selection, and he's always going to be involved because the Washington Redskins are going to be down in just about every game. So you like to see picking up a player who can be a flex option, low end running back too, as your second to last selection in the draft. So kudos to Travers on that one. And finally, we get to Chris McNamara, and looking at his draft, he had a pretty solid. I'm looking at his first 4 or 5 picks, not too much. The first one I'll pick on here is Kenyon Drake as a bust in round 5, and I liked Kenyon Drake going in. He was one of my targets this season, but I didn't really consider the fact that Miami. This was before our draft, but Miami right around Labor Day weekend would just completely sell out its team. You traded Laramie Tunzel, the left tackle, and then you trade away your best receiver in Kenny Stills. And it was pretty clear from that point on that winning was not going to be a priority. And I'm not saying that they're tanking, because I do believe Brian Flores that they're trying to win every game. The coaching staff is trying to win every game, but they're getting rid of all the good players, so you can try as hard as you want, you're going to lose. And so that tells me the organizational direction is trying to lose. And anytime you have a running back on a losing team, it's not a winning formula. And that really hurt Chris here at his round 5 selection. Value wise, you know, we're at the last team here, so I can't be a complete jackwagon and give him the no values. But I'm looking here for, in the double digit rounds, Trey Burton, nah. Phil Rivers, I guess you could say, but not really compared to some of the quarterbacks available at that time. Vikings defense, Deshaun Hamilton, Justice Hill didn't really work. I'll give him Jordan Howard in round 9, and the reason is I think we all thought Jordan Howard was older than he was. Like, Jordan Howard feels like he feels like an old man in the NFL, but he really isn't. He's been in the league 4 or 5 years. I think this is his 5th year, and I'll cross check that at some point. But 5th season, he's not. He just isn't a flashy runner, but he's real solid. He doesn't fumble. He can catch like something that's wide open, so he's not really a receiving back, but real reliable, tough guy. I mean, that one of those touchdown runs he had against the Packers last week on that Thursday, he just bounced off a guy at the goal line and punched it in. That's something, and that's why he's getting the playing time there in Philadelphia. I expect he'll at least be involved. I don't really know if Miles Sanders is going to break out and be the guy in Philadelphia. I think it's going to be more of a 50-50 split, and you saw that against the Packers. Hopefully it continues where Darren Sproles isn't involved. So you get a player like that in round 9 at the running back position, it's a good value for Chris. All right, that wraps up the draft recap segment of this episode 1. We're now going to move into the trade block. And I'll tell you, this trade block, I've mentioned this earlier, when I reached out to these owners, and I reached out to Edwin, Travers, Tam, Mark, and John, and I was expecting some like spare parts, being offered here and there. That's kind of what I did. So I'm not going to start with my team, and I'll talk about my on the block players once I get through everyone else's, because I thought they made some very interesting guys they put out there. Starting off with Edwin. Edwin went out and said Miles Sanders, Austin Hooper, and Darren Waller. This is going to be really interesting for any team that's going out there looking for a tight end. And in general, one of the number one things I heard from teams talking to them was, I'm interested in a running back. And, Miles Sanders isn't right now the number one guy. We talked about him earlier. I'm not sure he'll be that. But he's on a really good team and what's probably going to be a 50-50 split. So he has some value at the running back position. And I think if other teams are looking for backs, that might be an easier target for them to go get. And then obviously, like I mentioned before, like you have a tight end, Austin Hooper and Darren Waller. He's got some ability to trade one. And I don't even need to go through the teams to know there's teams out there who need a tight end. Moving on to Travers, this one was my favorite. He said, quote, my team blows. Everyone's on the block. Quote, looking for running back will overpay for Pat's D. So, Mark, onus is on you if you like any of these guys and you want to get an overpay for the Pat's D. But here's the guys that Travers listed. And again, pretty interesting. Adam Thielen, Chris Godwin, Devontae Adams, Bears D, and O.J. Howard. So, I mean, you look at Adams, Godwin, Thielen. Godwin's probably the most interesting of the bunch, only because Adams is currently hurt. Of course, Adams, when healthy, is an elite receiver. So if you want to take a chance that he's going to recover from that turf toe and be available later in the season, maybe you're a 4-0 team, 3-1 team, you go out and do that. My team's 1-3, so unfortunately I won't be the one trying to offer for Devontae Adams, but it's an option. It certainly is. Adam Thielen again. Can we get rid of Mike Zimmer and the offensive coordinator, Kevin Stefanski. Uh, I wish they kept John DeFilippo. I loved that Vikings offense early on last year. And it really was the defense not performing well, which they blamed on not running the ball. Well, here's a thought for you, Mike Zimmer, too. Maybe you should actually balance the attack. Like last year, you passed too much and you didn't like that. So this year, you run too much. Maybe balance is the answer, buddy. Give that a try. Let me know how it goes. So, moving on from Travers' team, Tam threw out Tyler Boyd, Royce Freeman, and Tyrell Williams. Again, like Royce Freeman is kind of in that same category as a Miles Sanders, where you're like, look, no one's going to put their elite running backs on the market. There's just not enough guys out there. So if you need help at the running back position, you go to these 50-50 splits, these Sanders, Royce Freemans, and then you might be able to get some value if there's an injury. One of them, I don't know. I think Sanders has a chance to emerge on his own and push Jordan Howard into the distance a little bit, maybe to like the 30%, 25% snap share. Whereas I think this uh, Royce Freeman and Lindsey split is just going to be 50-50 no matter what. And that's why I think that's more of an injury situation. Tyrell Williams, he's one of only three viable offensive players on the Raiders. They have Darren Waller, Tyrell Williams, and Josh Jacobs. And so they get a lot of volume. And Jacobs should get even more volume than he does. And I think that does make Tyrell a little interesting for any receiver needy teams out there. We get to Mark, who said Mark was more on like the me strategy where he's like, hey, if you want any spare parts from my bench, yeah, that's who's on the block. But he also mentioned Golden Tate, and I forgot about this before I absolutely besmirched Golden Tate earlier in the podcast, unfortunately. So sorry, Mark, for that. But here's a player. So a lot of people do believe he's going to be a high volume receiver for the Giants this season. If that comes true, could look pretty good. So his bench, too, to close the loop here, his bench, Christian Kirk, Carlos Hyde, Frank Gore, Jamal Williams, and Deebo Samuel. And he said he'd be willing to trade bench running backs for a receiver. So again, Hyde and Gore, guys who could get some volume, and maybe they're not the sexiest guys. Sexy. I don't want to judge the guys. I said they're not the sexiest players, at the running back position, but they do get volume, so that's nice. Now we get John, says looking for a running back and pretty much willing to throw any of his receivers out into the ring for a running back. Keep in mind, this doesn't mean you go out and you offer Frank Gore for Keenan Allen. But, if you do have a higher end running back, you could try something like that. So John listed Keenan Allen, Julian Edelman, Kenny Galladay, A.J. Green, and Marquise Brown. So definitely, I mean, you look at some of these players being offered, and a lot of good receivers. So if you're low on receivers and you're willing to give up or play the game or at running back, you can do so. So, like for instance, like I'm looking at Edwin with Miles Sanders on the block, and also Tam with Royce Freeman on the block. If you do need a receiver, or like I think Edwin does because he's the owner who had Antonio Brown, you could try to flip Miles Sanders maybe to Tam for Tyler Boyd, or maybe Travers is interested for I don't maybe you could package up for Godwin. I don't know how much you like Thielen or if you're just as mad at Mike Zimmer as I am, but it's certainly something you could try to do. And finally get to my team, and I threw some, I don't know if I want to say spare parts because I still think Damian Williams can catch a lot of passes in that Chiefs offense, but we're not sure what it's going to look like now with the emergence of Darrell Williams either. But Damian Williams and Philip Dorsett are two players I would be willing to talk about, and both wouldn't come with they'd probably come pretty cheap, honestly, in packages and such. But now that I'm seeing some of the quality though that's being offered on the trade block, I do want to throw some other people out there. I would talk about dealing away Sony Michel or Josh Jacobs under the right circumstance. I don't have much running back depth, so I would need a running back in return as well. But if you're Will Tam and you want Josh Jacobs or Sony Michel and you're willing to do like Tyler Boyd and well, even something like I'm not a big Royce Freeman fan, but this was Boyd and Freeman for something like that. I don't know, like something that could be interesting. Uh, but hopefully these players help spark the trade market a little bit. Just knowing that they're on the block. And again, I'm going to run down through them pretty much before I do that. Anyone on my team is usually up for talks. I don't scoff. No one's unreachable. None of that stuff. But certainly, the players I listed are the ones that I think have some combination of value, and I would be interested in trading a little cheaper. So again, I listed Damian Williams and Philip Dorsett. Edwin listed Miles Sanders, Austin Hooper, and Darren Waller. Travers said essentially everyone on this team, but when pushed, said Adam Thielen, Chris Godwin, Devontae Adams, Bears defense, and O.J. Howard. Tam said Tyler Boyd, Royce Freeman, Tyrell Williams, Mark Golden Tate, Christian Kirk, Carlos Hyde, Frank Gore, Jamal Williams, and Deebo Samuel for the bench platter. And John, looking for a running back, listed his entire receiving core of Keenan Allen, Edelman, Galladay, A.J. Green, and Marquise Brown. That about wraps up our trade block segment. Just want to throw some names out there, get the conversation flowing, get the text messages flowing. Haven't had many trades. I don't even think have we had one? I don't think we've had one. I don't think I've been involved in one. Wow. All right. Well, we need to get something going, guys. All right. To wrap up the show, not everyone who's listening to this is necessarily part of the Vampire League, but we do have a 6-person Vampire League with myself, Edwin, Tam, Mark, Travers, and John. And I'm the vampire, so they drafted 5 teams drafted everyone, filled their roster, and I picked up the scraps. My team's not terrible, but it is 0-4. I had some near misses. I was going to beat Edwin. I had a 5-point deficit that game against the Falcons when Deshaun Jackson got injured, didn't play, and that was unfortunate. I would have been able to pick up Alvin Kamara because if I beat a team, I get to grab their best player as a vampire. And I also get first dibs on the waiver wire. So you can build your team up, it just takes some time. I almost beat John, too, in a close matchup. Robert Woods scored just enough points to avoid me grabbing Ezekiel Elliott. So a couple things go different. I could have Zeke and Kamara on my team, and we could be looking pretty good. Unfortunately, I'm 0-4, and Mark is just absolutely taking bodies in that league. A combined 4-0, if I'm not wrong, between both leagues. So he's sitting there with a smile on his face, doing whatever it is he does. And, well, congrats, Mark. I was gonna end this here with an early favorites, but I'm just gonna say with the combined 8-0 record, Mark won the early season. Great job, great drafting. I hope to see you and compete with you in one of these leagues this year at some point. But if you really pushed me for an early favorite in this fantasy league, I know you guys are gonna hate us, but John and I together are unstoppable. It's just a fact. We won the league last year. We had to break it up so you guys could compete. Now, John still has a really good team, which makes you think that, pretty sure there was a little bit more John than Brandon in that championship. But hey, I'm going to take my 50% and I'm going to run with it. And John's team this year, I highlighted it. He has the top 2 running backs so far on the season. Might be 2-2, but Austin Eckler is still going to be at least a running back 2 in PPR. I mean, he's got McCaffrey, Eckler, then his receiving core of Keenan Allen, Julian Edelman, Marquise Brown, who's an air yards champion. Is definitely some more points coming his way. He's had some tough luck. Jalen Samuels is a pretty interesting flex that he picked up. He has Kenny Galladay. He's got A.J. Green waiting in the realm. And the quarterback is the one area for him. Jared Goff. It's been Jared Barf so far this year. And the good part about that is that quarterback is the easiest position to replace. So hopefully we see John go out and find someone of value there, or maybe Jared Goff turns it around. But that's all we have for episode 1. Thank you for listening. Hope I can continue to do this, make it interesting for our league, provide some entertainment. John, of course, you're more than welcome for any write-ups you would like to do. We miss having you around the office, but it's nice to have you as part of the team. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Good luck in week 5, and I'm hoping I'm 2-3 by then. All right, see you all later.